Start by telling you a couple of things. One is I have, you can pick one of these up over on the table along with other information. This is an event that Rockford Urban Ministry is holding this week, Stan?
Next week,
Next
next
week.
Thursday.
Next Thursday on gun control. So, thank you. Put that down. I also want to mention, because everybody tends to run out at the end, so I wanted to mention that November 14th, we will be doing a presentation on the Equal Rights Amendment. And if we all do our job and talk to our representatives and urge them to please vote for the legislation, we will celebrate and have cake. Otherwise, we will be strategizing on how to get it passed. Okay, so that's November 14th. The information will go out, so keep an eye out for it. We unfortunately do not have a location as the library is not available to us on that day. So we're going to get started, and we really appreciate that all of our speakers were able to come tonight because they've traveled from the Chicago area. And so I'm going to introduce them, and then, well, I'm going to welcome them, and then I'm going to let Sarah Dady introduce them. Sarah is a member of the League and a member of our immigration committee, and she herself is an immigration attorney here in Rockford. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, so we're all going to use this one microphone, which we'll be passing down, so everyone watch the wire. As Claire mentioned, I am an immigration attorney with Dady and Hoffman, and my law partner Bethany Hoffman is here tonight too. Has been instrumental with immigration issues. Beth, did you bring your membership application for the League tonight? Good, excellent. And I don't know if Claire made the plug, but for anyone who is not a member of the League of Women Voters, I would encourage all of you to join. It's not limited to women, so feel free. So I'm really excited to talk about DACA tonight, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and I'm thrilled that we have such an esteemed panel collected. My hope is that after this evening, everyone here will leave with a better understanding of what the current legislation is in Congress surrounding deferred action for childhood arrivals undocumented youth that were brought to the United States. Our first panelist is Claricel Duque. She is the Chief of Staff for Senator Durbin's Chicago office. She oversees a 14-person office which provides constituent services to over 8 million constituents. Is that about right? A little more. All of Chicago and the collar counties. Northeastern Illinois. And you're also responsible for statewide communications and scheduling for the senator. Great. So thank you for coming this evening. We have Fred Sau, who is the Senior Policy Counsel for the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Fred has a Rockford connection. He lived here, and he was an attorney for Prairie State Legal Services out here in Rockford. That hasn't been for a really long time, because the only capacity that I've known Fred in is with ICIRR. And I like to say anything good that has happened for the immigrant community in the state of Illinois is a direct result of ICIRR's efforts. For example, the temporary visitor driver's licenses, the Trust Act, all of that, I think we can thank ICIRR for, and directly Fred. We also have Kim Reed, who is the League of Women Voters for the state of Illinois immigration issue specialist. She has been studying the immigration issue for the League for a very long time, and she'll be talking about the League's position. She is a member of the Glen Ellen chapter of League of Women Voters. Unfortunately, Victor Garcia, who has deferred action for childhood arrivals, was unable to make it tonight due to illness. But we do have a statement from him, which Sarah Heidemann will be reading on his behalf. So with that, I'd like to start with Clarasol. And would you please explain what the DREAM Act is and why Senator Durbin has introduced it?
Thank you so much, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for having Senator Durbin's office represented here tonight. It's a real pleasure for me always to have an opportunity to talk to you about the DREAM Act. It was about 16 years ago. I happened to be an immigration caseworker at the time for Senator Durbin's office when we received a case from the Merritt School of Music, which is a nonprofit that takes in children from mostly Chicago Public Schools who are looking for musical education. They'd had a young girl who was a musical prodigy, self-taught pianist, who had been getting lessons at the Merritt Music for a number of years. She was 18 years old and she was getting ready to graduate from Lane Tech High School. When her private lesson teacher approached her about these calls and letters she was getting from the Juilliard School of Music and the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, she was shocked to learn that this young girl by the name of Teresa Lee had no plans of going to college. Why would that be? Why would someone so talented not want to pursue their education? Well, as it turns out, Teresa was the daughter of Korean immigrants to the United States. She'd arrived in the United States at the age of 2, and she had lived in the United States from the age of 2 till that point when she was 18 years old, and she was undocumented. She had never breathed a single word about this to anyone in her life. Her family was living in the shadows. They were scared. They didn't know what would happen to their family if one day they were discovered. So the school approached us and said, sure enough, Senator Durbin's office could help, right? And so I took the case and looked at it like every other case that came before us, and I took it to the Immigration Service at the time, and they came back and said, oh, this is a very straightforward case. This young lady must leave the country and reapply for admittance in 10 years. In 10 years. Why? Because there was no pathway for this young girl. That was 16 years ago, and it was a time where not many people, young people, spoke about their immigration status. But what we very quickly found out was that Teresa was one of thousands of young people across our country who had come to the United States at a very young age, who had gone through our education system, and they were approaching high school graduation without any options to pursue an education. As the years went by, so immediately after that, Senator Durbin introduced the first DREAM Act. And he has introduced the DREAM Act in every Congress over the course of the last 16 years. What is the DREAM Act? How would the DREAM Act solve the problem of thousands of young people in the United States who are undocumented? So this piece of legislation has changed over the years, but the current piece of legislation that is in the Senate today would say that someone in Teresa Lee's situation, if they could prove that they had entered the country before the age of 18, if they could prove that they've been living in the United States for 5 consecutive years, if they had no issues with the law, and if they would go through the process of submitting an application, taxes, and all the things that immigrants do when they have an opportunity to apply for benefits in our country, that they would then start a path to citizenship that would start with legal permanent residency, and then eventually after 5 years of legal permanent residency, they would be allowed to apply for U.S. citizenship. And that's the current DREAM Act as it stands today. In the interim, and I know that there'll be some conversation, in the interim, Senator Durbin not only has introduced the DREAM Act and has worked towards its passage, it has passed in the Senate in one Congress and then not in the House, and then in another Congress it's passed in the House of Representatives and not in the Senate. Then it was included as part of the comprehensive immigration reform bill that the Gang of Eight in the Senate were able to move forward. It just has never completely made it. And so in 2012, President Obama created DACA, and I don't know if someone will be talking about that, so I'll leave it, DACA, I apologize, DACA, which gave these young people a reprieve. I'll tell you that Senator Durbin has taken cases from across the country to stop the deportation of these young people, who many times, and we've seen the stories over and over, have surpassed great challenges to put themselves through school, because obviously they do not qualify for any aid whatsoever, have gone to great lengths to achieve really great things here in our country. We know that these young people are teachers, they are lawyers, they're in school to be doctors, they work with us in our local school districts, they work with us in our local hospitals, in every part of society. And just to wrap up, I'll tell you the story with Teresa Lee. She ended up going to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. There was an angel who came into her life and was able to sponsor her to go to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music. She went on to play in Carnegie Hall, is pursuing her doctorate in music in New York City. She did eventually marry a jazz musician, American jazz musician, and she is now a US citizen in her story. But she today continues to work on behalf of dreamers in New York City, and she's absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to be back in Rockford. This is my 4th time back in Rockford this year. You keep pulling me back. As Clarisol mentioned, DACA was a program initiated under President Obama back in 2012, specifically to protect and benefit young people who, for the most part, would have qualified for lawful status under the DREAM Act. President Obama, had the authority to prioritize who gets deported and who is being set aside as not being so high a priority for deportation. So in the exercise of that discretion, he decided to set aside, this category of younger people who grew up here in the United States, who, in many cases knew no other country than the United States, have gone through public school here, many of whom have gone on to college. DACA enabled these young people to further their educations, but also gave them permission to work, which in turn allowed them to support their families, to earn money, to advance in their careers. As Clarisol mentioned, many of these young people are teachers, they're doctors, they're medical students, they're business owners, they're engineers, they're entrepreneurs. They're really brilliant people, who have gotten the opportunity, thanks to DACA, to really benefit themselves, but also benefit this entire country. The program, again, the program began in 2012. It offered these protections for a 2-year term. So several DACA recipients have applied to renew for DACA, in some cases as many as 3 times since the program began in 2012. Unfortunately, this current administration has seen fit to end the program. As of September 5th, people who qualify for DACA but who never got it are no longer able to apply. Those who have it, but whose DACA is will be expiring between September 5th and March 5th, had a 1-month window to reapply for another 2 years. That 1-month window ended October 5th. And from the statistics that have been released by Homeland Security, about a quarter of those individuals who fell into this category missed out. They did not file. Interestingly enough, though, about half the people who fell into this category already had their paperwork in, even before this filing window opened. They saw what was coming. But the last category is people whose DACA expire after March 5th of next year. So if your DACA expires on March 6th, that's it. That's it. Unless Congress acts, or unless the White House acts, and there have been some rumors about that, DACA protection for these individuals is going to run out. Just to give you an idea of the scope, so there are approximately 700,000 DACA recipients in the United States, or let me reframe that. There have been about 800,000 people who've received DACA at one time or another. There are 700,000 individuals who've maintained DACA protection. Some people have received it and let it expire, for whatever reason. Here in Illinois, there are roughly just under 70,000 individuals who qualify for DACA, and of that, roughly 42,400 actually have applied for and received DACA. That's an uptake rate of more than 60%, which is actually among states throughout the United States is pretty good. I'd like to think that ICRR and our member organizations and many of the community organizations that we work with played an important role in getting the information out there regarding DACA and providing assistance for these young people to put in their applications. Another estimate, this comes from the University of Southern California, is with the end of DACA, that is going to cost the state $2.4 billion in gross domestic product. So it'll be a significant, this will have a significant impact on our state's economy. So, this is the situation that we're in now. We have, hundreds of thousands of young people who are now going to be vulnerable, not just to losing their protection or losing their ability to work, but also vulnerable to deportation. And keep in mind that all of these young people provided information about themselves, their addresses, their social media handles, their schools, their work sites, with the hope of receiving DACA protection. And now all that information is known to the government. That's particularly why many of these young people are anxious right now. They're known to the government. What's to stop the Homeland Security from turning around and using this information against them? So that's the predicament that we're